The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown street as Marcus Chen walked quietly toward the coffee shop on Fifth Avenue. At 42 years old, he had the kind of face that people forgot easily. Average height, dark hair beginning to show gray at the temples, and clothes that never stood out in a crowd. This was exactly how Marcus preferred it. He worked as a night security guard at a small office building, a job that paid just enough to cover his modest apartment and simple lifestyle. Most people who knew him would describe Marcus as polite but distant, the kind of man who kept to himself and never caused any trouble. They had no idea that 20 years ago his name had been whispered in very different circles. Marcus pushed open the glass door of Emma's coffee corner, breathing in the familiar smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries. The owner, Emma Rodriguez, looked up from behind the counter with her usual bright smile. She was one of the few people in the neighborhood who made an effort to talk to him beyond simple pleasantries. "Good morning, Marcus," Emma called out cheerfully. "The usual?" "Please," Marcus replied softly, pulling a few crumpled bills from his jacket pocket. "Black coffee, no sugar." As Emma prepared his order, Marcus noticed the small television mounted in the corner was showing the morning news. The reporter was discussing some corporate scandal involving a technology company, but Marcus wasn't really listening. He had learned long ago to avoid paying too much attention to news about powerful people and their problems. "Here you go," Emma said, sliding the steaming cup across the counter. "You know, Marcus, you've been coming here for 3 years and I still don't know much about you. What did you do before the security job?" Marcus's hand paused for just a moment as he reached for the coffee. It was a question he had been asked many times over the years, and he always gave the same answer. Nothing interesting, just different jobs here and there. Emma seemed to sense that this was all she would get from him, so she smiled and moved on to help the next customer. Marcus found his usual table by the window, where he could watch the street while sipping his coffee. This had become his morning routine. 45 minutes of quiet time before his shift ended and he could go home to sleep. The street outside was already busy with people heading to work. Marcus watched them hurry past, briefcases and phone calls, everyone absorbed in their own important lives. A few blocks away, he could see the tall glass building where Datatech Industries had their headquarters. The company had been in the news lately, something about their young CEO making changes that upset some investors. Marcus had no particular interest in corporate drama, but he found himself watching as a sleek black car pulled up in front of the Datatech building. Even from a distance, he could tell it was expensive, the kind of vehicle that screamed money and power. A young man stepped out, probably in his early 30s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that Marcus guessed cost more than he made in 6 months. The man moved with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. This had to be James Morrison, the CEO everyone was talking about. Marcus had seen his picture in business magazines that customers sometimes left behind in the coffee shop. Morrison was everything Marcus had once thought he wanted to be: successful, wealthy, and feared by his enemies. As Marcus watched, 3 men emerged from a van parked across the street from the Datatech building. Something about their movement immediately caught his attention. After years of working security, Marcus had developed an eye for trouble, and these men definitely looked like trouble. They were trying to appear casual, but their eyes were focused entirely on Morrison as he walked toward the building entrance. The 3 men began crossing the street, and Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He recognized the way they moved: purposeful, coordinated, dangerous. One of them reached inside his jacket, and Marcus saw the flash of something metallic. Without thinking, he was on his feet, the coffee cup forgotten on the table. Emma looked up in surprise as Marcus suddenly rushed toward the door. "Marcus, is everything okay?" But he was already outside, his body moving with a speed and precision that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his muscle memory. The 3 men were closing in on Morrison, who was completely unaware of the danger. He was looking at his phone, probably reading emails or checking stock prices, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to change forever. Marcus's mind was racing as he ran down the sidewalk. He could call out a warning, but that would alert the attackers and possibly make things worse. He could call the police, but there wasn't time. The only option was to act, and acting meant revealing skills he had spent 20 years trying to forget. As he got closer, Marcus could hear one of the men speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Remember, we just need to scare him. The boss wants him to understand that some decisions have consequences." But Marcus could see the knife in the second man's hand, and he knew that just scaring someone rarely ended without bloodshed. These weren't professional criminals. They were sloppy, angry, and unpredictable. That made them even more dangerous. Morrison had stopped walking and was now standing near the building's entrance, still absorbed in his phone. The three men were less than 20 feet away from him, and other pedestrians were starting to notice that something was wrong. A few people had stopped walking and were looking around nervously, but no one seemed to understand what was about to happen. Marcus was now close enough to act. His heart was pounding, not from the physical exertion, but from the memories that were flooding back. He hadn't used these skills in 2 decades, hadn't even thought about them if he could help it. But watching 3 men prepare to attack someone, even someone he didn't know, brought everything rushing back to the surface. The first man was reaching for Morrison's shoulder when Marcus struck. Marcus moved like a ghost materializing from thin air. His first target never saw him coming. The man who had been reaching for Morrison's shoulder suddenly found himself face down on the sidewalk, his arm twisted behind his back in a way that made standing impossible without serious pain. The entire movement had taken less than 3 seconds and had been completely silent. The second attacker spun around, the knife still in his hand, but Marcus was already there. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as almost impossible to follow with the naked eye. The knife went flying through the air and clattered harmlessly across the concrete. The man holding it was now sitting on the ground, looking dazed and confused. His wrist bent at an angle that suggested it would be weeks before he could use his hand properly. The third man was smarter than his companions. Instead of trying to fight, he turned and ran. But Marcus anticipated this move and was already positioned to intercept him. A simple trip sent the fleeing attacker sprawling across the sidewalk, where he slid several feet before coming to a stop against a parked car. James Morrison finally looked up from his phone, probably wondering why the street had suddenly become so quiet. What he saw made no sense to him. 3 men were on the ground in various states of distress, and standing calmly in the middle of it all was a middle-aged man in a plain jacket who looked like he might work at a grocery store. "What just happened?" Morrison asked, his voice shaking slightly. He was clearly trying to process the scene in front of him. Marcus was breathing normally, as if he had just taken a casual walk instead of disabling 3 attackers in under 10 seconds. "These men were planning to hurt you," he said quietly. "You should call the police." By now a small crowd had gathered. People were pulling out their phones, some calling 911, others taking pictures and videos. Marcus noticed this and felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had spent 20 years avoiding attention, and now he was standing in the middle of a scene that would probably be all over social media within the hour. One of the witnesses, a young woman in a business suit, approached Marcus with wide eyes. "Sir, how did you do that? Are you a police officer?" "No," Marcus replied simply. "Just someone who happened to be here." But even as he said it, he could see the questions forming in people's minds. Normal citizens didn't move the way he had just moved. Normal security guards didn't disable 3 armed attackers without breaking a sweat. The crowd was starting to look at him with curiosity rather than gratitude, and Marcus knew he needed to leave before things got complicated. Morrison was still staring at him with a mixture of confusion and awe. "I don't understand. Who are you? Why did you help me?" Marcus started to back away from the crowd. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Morrison said firmly. "They wouldn't have. They couldn't have. What you just did, I've never seen anything like it." The sound of sirens was getting closer, which meant Marcus had maybe 2 minutes before the police arrived and started asking questions he didn't want to answer. He turned to leave, but Morrison caught his arm. "Wait, at least tell me your name. I want to thank you properly." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to disappear into the crowd and pretend this had never happened. But looking at Morrison's face, young, confused, and genuinely grateful. He found himself answering honestly for the first time in years. "Marcus Chen," he said quietly. "Marcus Chen," Morrison repeated, as if trying to memorize it. "I'm James Morrison, and I owe you my life." The police cars were turning the corner now, their red and blue lights flashing. Marcus could see Emma standing in the doorway of her coffee shop, probably wondering why her quiet, regular customer was suddenly the center of so much attention. One of the attackers, the one who had been carrying the knife, was starting to regain his senses. He looked up at Marcus with recognition dawning in his eyes, and what he said next made Marcus's blood run cold. "Wait a minute," the man said, his voice thick with pain, but suddenly filled with a different kind of fear. "I know who you are. You're the Phantom." The crowd went completely silent. Even Morrison stopped talking and stared at Marcus with new eyes. The name hung in the air like smoke, bringing with it memories and implications that Marcus had spent 2 decades trying to escape. The Phantom. It had been his code name in another life, in another world. A world where names like that meant something, where men like Marcus Chen didn't exist, but legends did. A world he had walked away from when he was 22 years old, leaving behind everything he had been trained to be. Marcus could see the recognition spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some of them were too young to remember, but others were old enough to recall the stories. Urban legends, most people thought. Tales of a man who could appear and disappear like smoke, who could stop armed groups single-handedly, who worked for people whose names were never spoken aloud. "That's impossible," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Phantom was just a story, something people made up. Marcus met his eyes and saw the exact moment when Morrison realized that some stories were true. The young CEO took a step back, suddenly seeing the man who had saved his life in an entirely different light. The police officers were getting out of their cars now, and Marcus knew his time was up. In a few minutes, they would start taking statements and asking questions. They would want to know who he was, how he had learned to fight like that, and why a simple security guard had skills that most special forces operators would envy. But first, they would have to catch him. And despite 20 years of living a quiet life, Marcus Chen still remembered how to disappear. He looked at Morrison one last time, seeing confusion and fear and something that might have been respect in the young man's eyes. "Stay safe, Mr. Morrison," he said quietly, "and maybe reconsider whatever decision made those men angry enough to come after you." Then, before anyone could react, Marcus stepped backward into the crowd of onlookers and simply vanished. One moment, he was there, and the next he was gone, leaving behind only questions and a legend that most people had thought was just a story. The story spread like wildfire across social media within hours. Videos taken by witnesses showed a middle-aged man in ordinary clothes moving with impossible speed and precision, disabling 3 attackers in seconds before disappearing into the crowd. But it was the name whispered by one of the attackers that turned a simple street rescue into something much bigger. Detective Sarah Walsh sat at her desk reviewing the case files, her coffee growing cold as she studied the witness statements. 22 years on the force had taught her to spot when something didn't add up, and this case had inconsistencies written all over it. According to everyone present, Marcus Chen had moved like a trained professional, yet his background check showed only a series of ordinary jobs: warehouse worker, store clerk, night security guard. The surveillance footage doesn't help much, her partner, Detective Mike Torres, said, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "The angle's wrong, and there's a delivery truck blocking most of the action, but what we can see matches the witness statements. This guy took down 3 armed men without even breathing hard." Sarah flipped through the file again, stopping at a photograph taken from someone's phone. Marcus Chen looked completely ordinary, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But the way he stood, even in that grainy image, suggested someone who was very aware of his surroundings. "What about the name?" she asked. "The Phantom. Does that mean anything to you?" Torres leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "My dad used to tell stories when I was a kid. Said there was this guy, maybe 25 years ago, who worked for people who didn't officially exist. Never caught, never photographed clearly, just rumors and whispers. Most cops figured it was urban legend stuff. Sarah was about to respond when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized, Chief Rodriguez calling from his personal line. She answered immediately. "Walsh here." "Sarah, I need you to come to my office right now and bring the Chen file." The chief's voice carried a tone she had rarely heard in all their years working together. Not anger, not frustration, but something that sounded almost like fear. 5 minutes later, Sarah knocked on the chief's door and entered to find him sitting across from a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. "Detective Walsh," Chief Rodriguez said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Agent Harrison from the Department of Justice. He has some questions about your case." Agent Harrison stood up and extended his hand, his smile polite but cold. "Detective, I understand you're investigating the incident involving Marcus Chen." "That's right," Sarah replied, shaking his hand, and noting that his grip was firm and his eyes never left her face. "Are you familiar with Mr. Chen?" "You could say that," Harrison replied, settling back into his chair. "Marcus Chen, also known as the Phantom, was one of our most valuable assets for approximately 4 years, from 1999 to 2003. He was part of a classified program that officially never existed." Sarah felt her understanding of the case shift dramatically. "What kind of program?" Harrison exchanged a look with Chief Rodriguez before continuing. "The kind that handled problems too sensitive for normal law enforcement. Marcus was exceptional, intelligent, disciplined, and completely invisible when he needed to be. He could get in and out of situations that would require a full tactical team, and he never left evidence behind." "So what happened?" Sarah asked. "Why did he leave?" "That's classified," Harrison said, but his expression suggested the story wasn't entirely pleasant. "What matters now is that Marcus Chen has maintained a perfect cover for 20 years. No one was supposed to know who he really was. This incident changes everything." Chief Rodriguez leaned forward. "Agent Harrison has asked us to close the case. No charges will be filed against Chen, and the matter is being transferred to federal jurisdiction." Sarah felt a surge of frustration. "Sir, with respect, this is a local crime. 3 men attempted to assault James Morrison, and Marcus Chen prevented it. We have procedures to follow." "Detective," Harrison said quietly, "Marcus Chen is now in extreme danger. The moment his real identity became public, he became a target for every criminal organization, foreign government, and private group that he worked against during his active years. These people have long memories and unlimited resources." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah thought about the ordinary-looking man in the surveillance photos, living his quiet life as a security guard, probably thinking his past was safely buried. "Where is he now?" she asked. "We don't know," Harrison admitted. "Marcus disappeared sometime yesterday evening. His apartment has been cleared out and he didn't show up for his security shift. He's gone underground, which is probably the smartest thing he could do." "What about Morrison?" Sarah asked. "Is he safe?" "James Morrison is under federal protection as of this morning," Harrison replied. "The attack on him appears to be related to some business decisions his company made regarding certain overseas contracts. We're handling that situation." Chief Rodriguez handed Sarah a thick envelope. "Detective, you're being temporarily reassigned to a task force that Agent Harrison is putting together. Your job will be to help locate Marcus Chen before someone else does." Sarah opened the envelope and found herself looking at files that were mostly redacted black lines. What little text remained painted a picture of a man who had been incredibly effective at his job. But the details of what that job actually involved were completely classified. "How are we supposed to find someone who spent years learning how to disappear?" she asked. Harrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Marcus has one weakness that most people in his former profession don't have. He cares about innocent people. 20 years ago, he walked away from everything because he didn't want to be responsible for certain kinds of collateral damage. Yesterday, he risked his cover to save a stranger's life. You think he'll surface again if someone else is in danger?" I think Marcus Chen is still the same man who chose to save James Morrison instead of walking away, Harrison said. And I think that's going to make him predictable, which in his line of work is usually fatal. Sarah studied the photograph of Marcus again, seeing him now not as a simple security guard, but as someone who had lived with secrets that could get him killed. What exactly are we protecting him from? Harrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. Detective. During his active years, Marcus was involved in operations on 6 continents. He helped dismantle criminal organizations worth billions of dollars. He extracted people from situations where governments couldn't officially intervene. He stopped things that would have made international headlines if they had succeeded. And now all of those people know his name and his face, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Exactly. The bounty on Marcus Chen's head is probably already in the millions, and it's only going to grow. Every professional killer, every criminal organization, every enemy he ever made is now hunting a middle-aged security guard who lives in a studio apartment and drinks coffee at the same shop every morning. Sarah closed the file, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere out there, a man who had spent 20 years living peacefully was now running for his life, and it was her job to find him before his past caught up with him. The question was whether they were trying to save Marcus Chen, or whether Marcus Chen was about to remind everyone why some legends never really die. Marcus sat in a 24-hour diner 3 states away from where his life had been turned upside down, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The news was playing on the television mounted in the corner, and he couldn't escape seeing his own face on the screen every few minutes. The footage from the street incident was being played on repeat, analyzed by experts who claimed to understand what they were seeing. The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Dolores according to her name tag, refilled his cup without being asked. She had kind eyes and hadn't said anything when he'd been sitting in the same booth for 3 hours, even though the dinner rush had come and gone. "You okay, honey?" she asked quietly. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." Marcus managed a small smile. "Just thinking through some career changes." She laughed at that, not knowing how accurate his statement really was. "Well, whatever you're dealing with, it'll work out. It always does. If only it were that simple," Marcus thought. His phone, which he had switched out for a burner model purchased with cash, buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. But when he opened it, his blood ran cold. "Hello, Phantom, it's been a long time, we need to talk." V. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. V could only be one person. Victoria Santos, his former handler and the closest thing to a friend he'd had during his operational years. If she was reaching out, it meant the situation was worse than he had imagined. He typed back quickly, "Thought you were retired." The response came within seconds. "Retirement is a luxury neither of us can afford right now. Check your email." Marcus had set up several secure email accounts over the years, maintained but never used, just in case his past ever caught up with him. He used the diner's Wi-Fi to access one of them and found a single message with an attachment. The email was brief. "This is what we're dealing with. The old rules don't apply anymore. Trust no one except me. V." The attachment was the intelligence briefing that made Marcus's hands shake as he read it. According to the document, word of his reappearance had spread through criminal networks around the world within hours of the street incident. More importantly, someone had put together a comprehensive file on his civilian identity, his apartment, his job, his daily routines, even the coffee shop where Emma worked. But the worst part was the list at the bottom of the briefing. Names. He recognized from operations 20 years ago, people who had sworn vengeance against the Phantom, organizations he had helped destroy. All of them were now mobilizing resources to find and kill Marcus Chen. The most disturbing name on the list was Dmitry Volkov, a Russian arms dealer who Marcus had exposed to international law enforcement in 2002. Volkov had spent 15 years in prison, and according to the briefing, he had been released just 6 months ago. The intelligence suggested that Volkov had been planning his revenge ever since his arrest, just waiting for the Phantom to surface again. Marcus closed the laptop and looked around the diner with new eyes. Every customer could be a threat. Every car in the parking lot could be surveillance. The peaceful life he had built over 20 years had evaporated in the span of a day. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the same number Victoria had texted from. "Hello, Marcus," came the familiar voice. Victoria sounded older but still carried the authority that had made her legendary in their former world. "I was hoping to never hear from you again," Marcus said quietly, conscious of the other customers in the diner. "I was hoping the same thing," Victoria replied. "But hoping and reality are two different things. You've seen the briefing? Some of it. How bad is it really? Worse than you think. The incident yesterday wasn't random, Marcus. James Morrison was specifically targeted because someone knew you would be there to stop it." Marcus felt the familiar chill that used to come before dangerous operations. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. 3 amateur thugs attack a CEO right outside your daily coffee shop at the exact time you're always there. Someone wanted you to act, wanted you to reveal yourself. This was a setup." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They used Morrison as bait, and you took it, just like they knew you would. The Marcus Chen I worked with 20 years ago would never have interfered in someone else's problems. But the man you became, the one who spent 2 decades living a normal life, caring about ordinary people, that man was predictable. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing how completely he had been manipulated. "So Morrison is still in danger." "Morrison was never the real target," Victoria said. "He was just the trigger. The real question is, what are you going to do now? You can disappear completely, start over somewhere they'll never find you. Or you can remember who you really are and fight back." "I'm not that person anymore, Victoria. I left that life behind for good reasons." "Did you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like that person never really went away. You just buried him under 20 years of coffee shops and security guard uniforms. But when the moment came, when someone innocent was in danger, the phantom was right there." Marcus knew she was right, but admitting it felt like opening a door he had spent 2 decades keeping closed. "Even if I wanted to fight back, I'm out of practice. I don't have resources, connections, or backup. I'm just one man against organizations with unlimited money and professional killers." "You're not just one man," Victoria said. "You're Marcus Chen. You're the person who walked into impossible situations and walked out alive. You're the reason some very bad people spent years looking over their shoulders. And more importantly, you're not alone." "What do you mean?" "Check your email again. I'm sending you an address. Be there in 6 hours and come ready to work. Some of the old team is still around, Marcus. We never really disbanded. We just went into different kinds of hiding." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone. A new email had already arrived with coordinates to a location about 4 hours away. Along with the address was a single line of text. "Time to remind them why legends never really die." Marcus paid his check and left a generous tip for Dolores, who smiled and told him to take care of himself. As he walked out into the parking lot, he caught his reflection in the diner's window and saw something he hadn't seen in 20 years. The man looking back at him wasn't Marcus Chen, the quiet security guard who minded his own business and lived a simple life. This was someone else entirely, someone who had once been feared by criminals around the world, someone who had chosen to disappear but had never really been gone. The phantom was waking up, and after 20 years of sleep, he was not in a forgiving mood. Marcus got into his car and started driving toward the coordinates Victoria had sent. Behind him, the ordinary life he had built was already beginning to feel like a distant memory. Ahead of him waited a confrontation with enemies who had spent 2 decades planning their revenge, but they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that 20 years of living quietly had made him soft, had dulled the skills that had once made him legendary. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The address Victoria had sent led Marcus to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of a small town he had never heard of. As he drove through the empty streets, checking his mirrors for surveillance, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was traveling backward through time. The careful, methodical approach to an unknown location, the constant awareness of potential threats, the weight of decisions that could mean life or death. It all felt as natural as breathing. The building Victoria had chosen was perfect for a clandestine meeting. Multiple exit routes, clear sight lines in all directions, and isolated enough that any unwanted visitors would be visible long before they could become a problem. Marcus parked his car where it could be moved quickly if necessary and approached the main entrance with the caution of someone who had survived 20 years in a profession where carelessness meant death. "You're 10 minutes early," came a familiar voice from the shadows. "Some habits never change." Victoria Santos stepped into the light, and Marcus was struck by how little she had aged. Still tall and athletic, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and prematurely gray hair that she had never bothered to color. She moved with the same controlled grace that had made her legendary among intelligence professionals around the world. "Victoria," Marcus said simply, feeling a complex mix of emotions he had thought were long buried. "Marcus," she replied, studying his face with the intensity of someone reading a tactical report. "You look good for someone whose life was destroyed. Yesterday. Civilian life agreed with you." "Past tense," Marcus said. "I assume you didn't call me here for a reunion." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Follow me. There are some people you need to see." She led him through the building, to what had once been a conference room. Inside, Marcus found himself facing 3 people he had hoped never to see again, not because he disliked them, but because seeing them meant his peaceful life was truly over. David Kim sat at a table covered with laptops and electronic equipment, his fingers flying over multiple keyboards simultaneously. At 35, he looked exactly the same as he had 15 years ago, thin, intense, and completely absorbed in whatever digital puzzle he was solving. David had been their intelligence specialist, capable of finding information that officially didn't exist and making electronic communications that were completely untraceable. Standing by the window was Carlos Mendoza, a large man with calloused hands and scars that told stories of operations that had gone wrong in spectacular ways. Carlos had been their explosives and heavy weapons expert, but more importantly, he had been the team member who could be trusted to get everyone out alive when missions turned into disasters. The third person was the biggest surprise. Rebecca Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was supposed to be dead. Marcus had attended her funeral 8 years ago, after she had been killed in a car accident that everyone assumed was an assassination attempt by enemies from her past. "Hello, Marcus," Rebecca said quietly. "I know this is confusing." Marcus stared at her, trying to process what he was seeing. Rebecca had been their medical officer and close-quarters combat specialist, someone who could save your life or end someone else's with equal skill. She looked different now, shorter hair, different facial structure, probably the result of extensive plastic surgery. "We faked my death," she continued, seeing his expression. "There were too many people who wanted me dead, and I was tired of constantly looking over my shoulder. It seemed easier to just disappear entirely." "We all disappeared in our own ways," Victoria said, gesturing for Marcus to sit down. "David became a cybersecurity consultant for major corporations. Carlos started a private security company. Rebecca became a trauma surgeon in a small hospital in Montana. And you became Marcus Chen, the security guard. But now we're all here," Marcus said, understanding the implications, "because someone forced us out of hiding." "Not someone," David said, looking up from his computers for the first time since Marcus had entered the room. "Multiple someones. I've been monitoring communications channels all night, and at least 12 different organizations are actively hunting you. The bounty started at $5 million and has already gone up to $15 million. Carlos whistled low. $15 million? "Marcus, what did you do to make people that angry?" "I stopped 3 men from attacking a CEO," Marcus replied, "and apparently walked into a trap that was 20 years in the making." Victoria activated a projector that displayed a map covered with red dots. "These are confirmed sightings of professional killers who have entered the country in the last 24 hours. Russian mafia, Yakuza, Colombian cartels, European crime syndicates, everyone who ever lost money or people because of our operations is sending their best hunters. The good news, Rebecca said with dark humor, is that they're probably going to spend as much time fighting each other as they do looking for you. $15 million makes for a lot of competition. The bad news, David continued, is that they're not just after Marcus. Someone leaked information about all of us. They know we work together, and they're assuming we'll try to help him. Marcus felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the burden of knowing that people he cared about were in danger because of his choices. I'm sorry. I should have just walked away yesterday morning. I should have let Morrison handle his own problems. Would you have? Victoria asked. Really? Could you have watched 3 men attack an innocent person and done nothing? Marcus considered the question seriously. No, I couldn't have. That's what makes you Marcus Chen instead of just another professional killer, Victoria said. It's also what makes you predictable, and in our former profession, predictability gets you killed. Carlos moved away from the window and sat down across from Marcus. So what's the plan? We can't run forever, and we can't fight the entire criminal underworld. Actually, we can, Victoria said, her voice taking on the tone Marcus remembered from mission briefings. We're going to do what we do best. We're going to make this problem disappear. David turned his laptop around so everyone could see the screen. I've been analyzing the bounty communications, and they're all being coordinated through a single encrypted network. Someone is organizing this hunt, providing intelligence about our locations and capabilities to all the different groups. Dmitri Volkov? Marcus asked. That's what we thought initially, Rebecca said. But the coordination is too sophisticated, the resources too extensive. This is bigger than one arms dealer with a grudge. Victoria touched a control, and the display changed to show an organizational chart that made Marcus's blood run cold. At the top was a name he had hoped never to see again, Alexander Kozlov. That's impossible, Marcus said quietly. Kozlov is dead. We confirmed it 8 years ago. We confirmed that someone matching his description died in a car bomb in Prague, Victoria corrected. But David found financial records showing that Kozlov's network never actually stopped operating. If anything, it got bigger and more sophisticated. Alexander. Kozlov had been their most dangerous opponent during Marcus's operational years. A former Soviet intelligence officer who had built a criminal empire spanning 3 continents, Kozlov had been responsible for arms trafficking, human trafficking, and assassination services for anyone with enough money to pay his prices. More importantly, he had been personally responsible for the deaths of at least 6 agents who had tried to infiltrate his organization. Kozlov always said he would outlive all of us, Carlos muttered. Looks like he might have been right. He's been planning this for years, David continued, pulling up more files. The attack on Morrison was just the beginning. Kozlov has been placing people in strategic positions throughout the government and law enforcement, waiting for the right moment to draw us out. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression grim. It gets worse. Agent Harrison, the federal agent who's supposedly running the task force to protect Marcus, he's been receiving payments from one of Kozlov's shell companies for the past 3 years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only were they being hunted by criminal organizations around the world, but the people who were supposed to be protecting them were working for their enemy. Detective Walsh? Marcus asked, thinking about the police officer who had seemed genuinely concerned about his safety. Clean, as far as we can tell, David said. But she's being fed false information by Harrison. Right now she thinks you're hiding in a safe house in Nevada, which is exactly where Kozlov wants her to think you are. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty industrial landscape. 20 years of peace. 20 years of believing his past was safely buried, and it had all been an illusion. Kozlov had been watching, waiting, planning for exactly this moment. What does he want? Marcus asked. It can't just be revenge. Kozlov never did anything unless there was profit involved. The same thing he always wanted, Victoria replied. Complete control. Our old unit disrupted too many of his operations, cost him too much money and too many assets. But more than that, we proved that his network wasn't invincible. As long as we were alive, we represented the possibility that someone could hurt him again. So he wants us all dead, Carlos said. Nothing new there. Not just dead, Rebecca corrected, studying the files on David's laptop. He wants us to die publicly, spectacularly, as an example to anyone else who might consider opposing him. The bounty isn't just about killing Marcus. It's about making sure the whole world knows that crossing Alexander Kozlov has consequences that last forever. Marcus turned back to face the team. These were people he had trusted with his life more times than he could count. People who had risked everything to stop criminals like Kozlov from destroying innocent lives. Now they were all in danger because of choices he had made 20 years ago and decisions he had made yesterday morning. I won't let him hurt any of you, Marcus said quietly. This is my fault and I'll handle it myself. Like hell you will, Carlos said immediately. We're a team, Marcus. We always have been. You don't get to play the lone hero now. Carlos is right, Victoria said. Besides, you walking away won't save us. Kozlov knows we'll always be a threat as long as we're alive. The only way this ends is if we end it. David was typing rapidly, on his keyboard, windows opening and closing too quickly to follow. I think I found something. Kozlov is planning something big, something that requires his personal attention. There's been a lot of encrypted communication about a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. Where? Marcus asked. That's the problem, David replied. The location is coded and I haven't been able to break it yet, but whatever it is, it's important enough that Kozlov is taking a huge risk by attending personally. Victoria was studying the map again, her expression thoughtful. If we can find that meeting, we can end this. Kozlov in person, probably with his top lieutenants. One operation could take down the entire network. Or get us all killed, Rebecca pointed out. This isn't 20 years ago. We don't have government support, unlimited resources, or backup teams. It's just the 5 of us against an organization that's had years to prepare for this exact scenario. Marcus looked around the room at his former teammates, seeing the same mixture of determination and fear that he felt himself. They were older now, maybe not as fast or as strong as they had been in their prime, but they were still the same people who had taken on impossible missions and somehow found a way to succeed. Then we'd better make sure we don't get killed, Marcus said. David, how long do you need to break that code? Give me 6 hours, maybe less, if I can access some of the databases I used to have clearance for. Rebecca, what kind of medical supplies do we have access to? I can get whatever we need. There are advantages to being legally dead. No one tracks your purchases. Carlos, weapons and equipment? My security company has a warehouse full of perfectly legal equipment that happens to be very useful for this kind of work. Marcus turned to Victoria. And you? What's your role in all this? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he had arrived, it looked genuine. The same role I've always had, Marcus. I'm going to make sure you all come home alive. 18 hours later, Marcus found himself crouched on the roof of a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, watching through high-powered binoculars as some of the most dangerous people in the world gathered for what David had discovered was called the settlement. Kozlov's encrypted communications had revealed that this wasn't just a meeting, it was a celebration, marking 20 years since the Phantom and his team had supposedly been neutralized as threats. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. While he had been living quietly as a security guard, Kozlov had been telling the criminal underworld that the legendary team was finished, broken up, and no longer a concern. Tonight's gathering was meant to be a victory party, with Kozlov presenting evidence that his greatest enemies were either dead, defeated, or living such ordinary lives that they might as well be invisible. Target confirmation, came Rebecca's voice through his earpiece. She was positioned in a hotel room 3 floors below the penthouse where the meeting was taking place. Kozlov just entered the building. He's got 8 bodyguards and they're all carrying enough firepower to level a city block. Carlos, what's your status? Victoria asked. She was coordinating from a mobile command center 2 blocks away, monitoring police communications and emergency services. Charges are set, Carlos reported from his position in the hotel's sub-basement. If we need to bring this whole building down, I can do it. But we'd better be sure everyone innocent is out first. David was with Victoria, his fingers dancing, across multiple keyboards as he maintained their communication network and monitored security systems throughout the hotel. Hotel security is completely compromised, he reported. Kozlov's people have been planning this for months. Every camera, every access card, every elevator, it's all under their control. Marcus adjusted his position and focused his binoculars on the penthouse windows. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, he could see approximately 30 people, all of whom he recognized from intelligence files as leaders of criminal organizations around the world. They were celebrating, toasting with expensive champagne, probably discussing how they would divide up the territories and operations that Kozlov's network had been managing. "I count 32 hostiles," Marcus reported. "All armed, all dangerous, and that's just the ones I can see. There are probably another 20 scattered throughout the building." "Too many for a direct assault," Victoria said, confirming what they all knew. "We stick with the original plan." "Marcus, you're sure about this?" Marcus checked his equipment one more time. Climbing gear, communications equipment, and weapons that felt both familiar and foreign in his hands after 20 years. "I'm sure. Give me 15 minutes to get into position, then start the distraction." The plan was complex but elegant, the kind of operation they had specialized in during their active years. While Marcus infiltrated the penthouse from above, the rest of the team would create enough chaos throughout the building to divide Kozlov's security forces and prevent any organized response. Marcus moved across the rooftop with the careful precision of someone who had done this countless times before. His body remembered the movements even if his mind sometimes doubted his abilities. 20 years of ordinary life hadn't completely erased 2 decades of training. The descent from the hotel roof to the penthouse balcony required climbing skills he hadn't used since his operational days, but muscle memory proved reliable. As he rappelled down the side of the building, Marcus found himself thinking about the morning this had all started. If he had chosen to walk a different route to the coffee shop, if he had decided to stay home that day, if he had simply ignored the 3 men threatening James Morrison, his life would still be quiet and unremarkable. But as he reached the penthouse balcony and began preparing to enter what was probably the most dangerous room in Chicago, Marcus realized he didn't regret his choice. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the cost was everything you had built over 20 years. "In position," he whispered into his microphone. "Distraction commencing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Victoria replied. The building's fire. Alarm system activated simultaneously on 12 different floors. Emergency lighting began flashing throughout the structure. The elevator system shut down completely, trapping several of Kozlov's security personnel between floors. In the confusion, Carlos triggered small explosive charges in the building's electrical system, causing power fluctuations that would make it impossible for security cameras to function properly. Inside the penthouse, Marcus could see the party. Atmosphere immediately changed to alarm and confusion. Bodyguards were talking urgently into radio headsets, trying to understand what was happening. Several of the criminal leaders were demanding explanations, while others were already moving toward the exits. But Alexander Kozlov stood calmly in the center of the chaos, a slight smile on his face as he surveyed the scene. Even from his position, outside the windows, Marcus could see that Kozlov looked exactly as he had 20 years ago. Tall, thin, with silver hair, and the kind of confidence that came from believing you were always the smartest person in any room. "He knows," Marcus said into his microphone. "Kozlov knows this is us." "Impossible," David replied. "Our communications are encrypted and there's no way he could have anticipated." "He's had 20 years to prepare for this," Marcus interrupted. "He knows how we operate, how we think. This whole thing could be another trap." But even as he said it, Marcus was already moving. The penthouse balcony door was locked, but locks had never been much of an obstacle for someone with his training. Within 30 seconds, he was inside the room where 32 of the world's most dangerous criminals were trying to understand why their perfectly planned celebration was falling apart. Marcus had learned long ago that in situations like this, hesitation was fatal. He moved through the room like a force of nature, using the confusion and darkness to his advantage. The first 3 bodyguards went down before they even realized they were under attack. The fourth managed to fire a single shot before Marcus disarmed him and used his own weapon against his companions. The criminal leaders, realizing that their celebration had become a battlefield, began scrambling for exits that Carlos had already sealed. Panic spread through the room as people who were used to being protected by armies of bodyguards found themselves trapped with someone who moved like a ghost and fought like a demon. But through it all, Alexander Kozlov stood perfectly still, watching Marcus work with the detached interest of a critic evaluating a performance. 20 years, Kozlov said, his voice carrying clearly across the chaos. 20 years and you're still the same predictable man, aren't you, Phantom? Marcus finished disabling the last of the bodyguards and turned to face his greatest enemy. Around them, the room was filled with unconscious or incapacitated criminals, but Kozlov looked as calm as if he were attending a dinner party. "Hello, Alexander," Marcus said quietly. "You're looking well for a dead man." Kozlov laughed, a sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Death is just another kind of cover identity, Marcus. Surely you've learned that by now. After all, Rebecca managed it quite successfully." The casual mention of Rebecca's faked death confirmed what Marcus had suspected. Kozlov knew everything about their current operation, possibly even more than they knew themselves. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, keeping his weapon trained on Kozlov while scanning the room for additional threats. "The same thing I've always wanted," Kozlov replied. "To prove that legends are just stories, and stories can be rewritten. You saved one man's life, and in doing so you've given me the opportunity to destroy not just you, but everyone you care about. My team is walking into traps of their own right now," Kozlov finished. "Did you really think I would gather all these people in one place just to make it easier for you to find me? This entire building is a carefully constructed kill zone, Marcus. Every exit is monitored, every room is prepared, every possible escape route leads directly into the hands of my people." Marcus felt the familiar chill that came with realizing a mission had gone catastrophically wrong. But he also felt something else. A cold, focused anger that he hadn't experienced in 20 years. "You made one mistake, Alexander," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "And what would that be?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 2 decades, it was the smile of the Phantom. "You assumed we were the same people we were 20 years ago. You planned for the team you used to know. But we've had 20 years to grow, to learn, to become something different." Kozlov's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Victoria," Marcus said into his microphone. "The building is secure," came the immediate reply. "Kozlov's people have been neutralized and the authorities are on their way. It's over, Marcus." As sirens began to wail in the distance and the sound of helicopters filled the air, Marcus saw understanding and something that might have been fear cross Kozlov's face for the first time in their long history. The legend of the Phantom had never really died. It had just been waiting for the right moment to remind the world why some stories never end.